Well, good morning, friends, and welcome back to Coker United Methodist Church Online, our Tuesday live stream conversation between myself. I'm Adam Knight. I'm the senior pastor here at Coker. My friend and my colleague, Dr. Mark Humphreys. We are glad to have you here with us. We hope your Easter celebration was a blessing. I'm only just now coming out of my post-Easter coma.
The Monday after.
That's exactly right. It's, but I tell you what, it's a great high on Sunday morning, and then, man.
The crater.
Yeah,
The Easter
exactly.
crater.
So, nevertheless, we're glad that you're here to continue these conversations with us. We're going to talk here for a bit. Then following this, you have a class that'll meet via Zoom. That's...
If you want the link to that, just email me at mark.humphrey@coker.org, and I can send you that link so you can jump on with us.
There you go. So we never have these things mapped out. We never really have them planned out other than what we're going to talk about. So, it can go 20 minutes, it could go an hour. We just don't ever know. But we're glad that you're here to join us. So today we want to talk about passing on faith. Passing on faith to the next generation, to the younger generations, to your own kids. As a pastor, I think of passing on faith to other people who just walk in the door.
Okay. Yeah.
Particularly, though, in this age that we've been discussing some over the last couple of weeks, the age of a growing number of nuns, people who claim no religious affiliation, growing number of people who are spiritually interested but not inclined to be a part of organized religion.
Yeah.
Things like that. That's sort of the context that we do ministry in now. We want to talk a little bit about passing on faith in that. So, kick us off here. Give me some initial thoughts there.
Well, first of all, and another element of that, which will figure into today's conversation, is that we all are in the middle of this, in that we have also inherited.
Yes.
So we have inherited, and we have accepted and rejected, and hopefully, you'll hear me say this over and over again. I'm such a big fan of the construction, deconstruction, reconstruction, constantly and that isn't just this sense of, there's always got to be some kind of an issue. It's really just what you would do in any relationship, to be like, how are we doing? What am I learning new about this person? And in this context, the person is, be it God or ourselves, and there's so many elements of it. So that's another component for me too, and I'll even hopefully talk about a little bit. Now, the other thing I think that you and I were just now talking about, that is happening now, is this emergence of folks who were raised in evangelical or maybe fundamentalist backgrounds, and in this current time, they find themselves really kind of disenfranchised. There's a lot of what I would call and what I would identify with, even religious, spiritual trauma that they have experienced, and so. I'm curious, and I feel, I would even say called and really compassionate to, just like so many of the great therapists come from insanely dysfunctional families. That's something for me that's really, it's important to be a part of that conversation, and just to put the card on the table is also for me to kind of figure out my stuff, because and because I have this pain, I have these wounds from various experiences with my family and with other church and things like that. And so when I have this, and I mentioned, I think a couple weeks ago, not wasting pain.
Yeah.
Like, when something like that happens, you have a choice. It's like, okay, well, so do I just kind of, at best, I get over it, or I work through it, and it certainly no longer controls me or hurts in the same way? Sure, that's great. But there's also this component, it's like, well, is there something about that story that creates a unique opportunity for me to then help others? And that, to me, the word that comes to mind with that is just redemption.
Sure.
It really does allow you to kind of like redeem your experiences. And so this is a real, this is a personal one. I mean, all these topics are personal.
We don't have conversations over things that we don't find interesting or personal or things like that. And so, as we kind of came up with this topic, I started thinking back to my own development, to my own upbringing, my family of origin, and the faith component in that. And I was blessed. I was raised in a mainline tradition Abilene, Texas, a smaller. We had four. They called them the four downtown churches.
Okay.
There was St. Paul Methodist, First Central Presbyterian, First Baptist, and First Christian. Those were your four downtown churches. I was part of First Central Presbyterian. And, I had great Sunday school teachers. My mom was the church librarian. My dad taught a young adult Sunday school for a group, but had great youth directors. Like, I never was one of the people who, was this true, like, as you hear the terminologies, seeker, or
Okay.
I never was one of these people that ran off and had my prodigal moments.
Yeah, you're Wormspringer.
Yeah, exactly. I just never did that. And it wasn't because of I wasn't trying to run for something. I wasn't scared of something. None of that appealed to me, and I appreciated who I was, at least I say that. I don't know that I think I knew who I was, but I understood this is who my people are. And so I'll just do this.
Okay.
And it was fine.
So help me understand one thing that's funny is as you say that, and I don't think I've shared this in here before, but a friend of mine who was raised in a very strongly Pentecostal background, we were joking the other day, we literally said the words, could you imagine having been Presbyterian? Like, in the best way, like,
Yeah.
oh man, wouldn't that have been great? So,
talked
that's my
about,
question
yeah.
for you. So then what is it about, and again, I get that there are a lot of factors here, because you're speaking kind of to what you inherited, and then that's what you're going to, with your kids, like what you're going to pass on, so with Rylan and Laurel. So what is it about what you inherited that you're like, okay, this is something that I want to pass that on, like maybe the intangibles even, not so much the specific theology maybe.
We didn't have a whole lot within my household, we didn't have tons of faith conversations per se.
Okay.
My family was not let's sit down in the living room and open up the Bible.
Really?
We didn't do that. No.
Yeah, which is fascinating because mine literally, progressively, eventually, that's all that was all the conversation really was.
Okay.
So when you had religious differences.
I'm going to say something and it's going to sound bad, and I don't mean it to sound bad, so I want to clarify that, Mom, if you're watching.
Don't read so much Bible. Are you about to tell people not to read?
No, I'm not. But, we talk sometimes about families that will tend to outsource the spiritual development of their kids to a church.
Sure.
That was my family.
Okay.
We were Presbyterian. We had a church that had staff that, did it. And so, come on. They're the ones that are going to teach you these things. Those then were, I would think that they were, those messages, those teachings were certainly undergirded, but not necessarily in an intentional manner.
Okay.
So as I look now as a parent, but not only a parent, as a pastor, a lot of the same things are true. We are a part of a mainline church. I didn't, though I have had shifts in my theological foundations and whatnot over time and done a lot of deconstruction, reconstruction, all of those things. We are a part, still in the larger stream of Christianity that I was raised in. We do have some intentional conversations.
Okay.
We do sit down as a family and read the scripture and talk. It's not something that, hey, this has to happen this way. And so I guess what I'm saying is, whereas there was no necessarily spiritual structure in my family of origin, there was still a framework.
Okay.
And it was this church. And this is just who we are. And this is what we believe, and these are the things that we do. Now, in my current family, as I'm thinking about passing on faith to my kids, they understand the framework. This is who we are, and this is how we live. But then also, I'm trying to be a little bit more intentional because I do want some of those conversations to happen in my home.
Okay.
And the large reason, and I'll close with this and then come back to you, is this. There were times that I had questions. And I had some doubts. The reason I'm Methodist is because I had some grave concerns about what I was hearing about Calvinism, which is the foundational theology of Presbyterianism. Sure. And I didn't feel like I could have those conversations in my home. Okay. And it's not to say that I would have been told, no, we don't talk about that. I just didn't. Those weren't there before, so why would we have a meaningful conversation about this now? Okay. So I want my kids to know they can always have any conversation with us. They can have any spiritual conversation they want. They can have any relationship conversation they want. They
Okay.
can have. I want them coming to us with those questions, not going to some of the other places that
Okay.
I went.
Okay.
And I didn't go. I mean, there were some questions I had that I did go to some unhealthy places.
Those like back alley reformed theologians.
Those sorts of things, yeah. In other areas of life. But then, I went to some other pastors and clergy, which my parents encouraged me to do.
And you didn't get good information there?
I got
or?
decent information, but it was unsatisfactory.
Okay.
I got some, we don't actually, that's
Yeah.
foundational over here, but we don't really think that, which then just led me to go, well, but what?
Yeah.
And so all of that to say, I just want my kids to know that whatever the question, whatever the topic, they can always come to us, and we will be more than happy to have that conversation. So we try to build in some of that intentionality in our own home and family.
So, because I think what you're also hitting on is what I would say, and what I think many would agree, is an issue within the church, which is where can questions be asked, and where is there a dialogue, and what is what's the dynamic in which we will not all agree. And I think it's great to say that from the pulpit, but that has to be lived out. And I think that's a big question for me, even as we, at Coker try to craft what this environment is how do we not just make that a tagline, that kind of like, it's almost like plausible deniability then.
Sure.
It's like, we've said that. So, but
Yeah.
no, how do we really say, nope. And it's almost, I always think like a teacher, are there questions? If the worst way to find out if there are questions is like, well, any questions? You gotta draw that out, and I'm sure you've probably had that with, I don't know if Laurel already is, but certainly with Rylan with his age, to kind of be like, hey, what? Like it comes to mind, like they always say that if an elementary school kid is depressed, they won't say they're depressed, they'll say they're bored. Those kinds of tells where you're like, as a parent, you're like, hey, you want, And so I think for us in leading the congregation, it's really important that we can both, present a logical theology, but at the same time say, really hold with light hands the things that we don't know, like that we can't absolutely. Because I think that for me as a kid was the thing, and it sounds like it was for you too. It was like, wait a minute. There's a lot of stuff that's on the, it's on the boilerplate that's like, not only do you have questions about it, it's not even what you're thinking here, and you're, and then for me, I think this is a little bit of difference because of me having been raised Baptist and more fundamentalist. There was so much certainty. I mean, hard line certainty. I mean, things that, and then the more I started to question, and then also just the more my education, I started questioning and wondering, and these kinds of things started to just be a part of my whole perception of the world. The more those things, the intellectual gymnastics that had to be done to try to justify, and it's like, and then it was just, well, faith. I mean, there's always this kind of like, and so those kinds of things were tricky. I think too, on the other side of it now, what I have really learned, because mysticism has really become a part of my faith, my practice, and my perception of the world. It has opened up. God is bigger to me because of that, and I look back and I'm like, man, saying we've got this all figured out robbed me of wonder.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, talk about do no harm, of being like, you know what? We don't really know. We'll never really know, but there's something for me in that because it was never talked about. I always think of like, I don't think I mentioned this in here, the Dr. Seuss, Horton Hears a Who. There was this great moment in which Horton's mom was like, we don't believe in things beyond what we can see. There is no, it's just right here. And creating that fear boundary on the other side of it now, I know now you're getting it, I'm getting it for me, for my boys, that I don't want that boundary, and I sure as heck don't want to be like, it's simple. I want to be like, we're still, and I want them to know that I'm still working it out. We're still in that conversation. I also think too, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I struggle with, especially because of how early I would have to say indoctrinated. Like I was baptized in the Otis Park public pool in Bedford, Indiana at the age of 6.
Okay.
I mean, and now looking back on that, I'm like, what in the world? I mean, we didn't believe in adult baptism, but I was 6, you know.
Sure.
So,
You didn't believe in
I mean, we didn't believe in infant. Sorry,
baptism.
yeah, we were Baptists, so we didn't. You know,
Right.
sorry, but what I'm saying is, I that whole that scripture, you know, raise up a little child in the way they should go, and when they're older, they will not depart from it. Of course, that was always presented as like, tell them what's right now, so then they won't mess up
Right.
later on. For me, in retrospect, I'm almost like, just be careful. I mean, like, just be thinking about
Sure.
what you give, because if you put them in a tight box,
Yeah.
you know, and the thing for me too, the lion in the closet here is conditional love. Is that when you teach, and you would never articulate, but when there's what you say and there's what you communicate.
Sure.
And when a kid gets a sense of like, if I don't see this the same way as my parents, if I land in different places, they're not going to love me the same way.
Yeah.
And I know people, and I'm one of them who's just absolutely experienced that.
Sure.
And so, you know, and I would even say, in that, it really is for me, it's that type of religiously based conditional love that then set in motion a lot of things that through therapy I've learned. Like my codependency comes from that type of indoctrination. So what it looked like for me then as an adult is it starts with, well, you need to believe this way or you're not going to kind of be one of us being your family.
Sure.
And then later on, the next thing you know, it's like, well, someone with a borderline personality disorder or someone, you know, with those kinds of odd, you know, conditional love, that person is in color, whereas a normal person who would just love you as you are, it's like, yeah, but I can't even engage. I mean, these are the kinds of things that, just to put myself out there, that it ends up being like, this is important. How we pass on faith is also how we pass on love.
Yeah.
So how are you talking about that?
I think there's a big truth in what you say there. And as I say it, I think back. I tell people I've lived a boring life because I never did have the prodigal moments. I never ran off and chased something else. I never, now I have had moments in my spiritual life where I've been, in the dark night of the soul, perhaps, trying to figure where does this come from. But there was never, for me, a question of whether or not any of this is real or anything like that per se. And though I was given a lot of freedom, so to put it in the terminology that you're talking about, I was loved very well. And there was never an expectation of this is what we believe as a family, and we'll always believe, and in order for you to be here, this is what it is. Because I have deviated some from, I think, probably of some of the things that maybe were a part of who I was growing up and who our family was growing up. But I've been loved well by my parents. I've been loved well by my in-laws. I've been loved well by all sorts of people who, in the end, I don't necessarily agree with on everything. And it's never affected their love for me, or at least that I've been able to tell, or my love for them. And what that in turn has allowed me to do, and I don't know if people believe me when I say this, but I'll stand up right up there in that pulpit and I'll tell the church that, you don't have to fall down on this exactly where I fall down on these things. Whether you find yourself here or find yourself here, we can debate those things, and I would like to debate those things, but I still want to be your pastor no matter what. I still love you no matter what. And I don't know if people believe me in that or not, because I don't know not everybody has had what I've had.
Okay.
Not everybody can say that they've been loved well.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, but that's also, what you're also talking about goes beyond theology. That's just cultural.
Yeah.
Like if you're, this pressure to conform in order to be accepted, I mean, the church doesn't have the market cornered on that. So we as human beings, bring this sense of conditional acceptance to the table from a whole range of sources.
Absolutely. I mean, the entire concept of dating is basically just how long can I handle you, and eventually either I reach a breaking point or I find the non-negotiable and that's over, or no, we can keep going, and
Okay.
it goes into, so the conditional becomes unconditional at that point.
Okay.
Who knows? Whatever you want to say there, but what it has, as I have grown in leadership, in my own theological understanding and everything, what I've realized is that the quickest way for me to shut down a conversation, and in many ways a relationship with somebody, is to become intensely dogmatic.
Yeah.
And I still see this so much in so many churches and so many places. The goal is to impart dogma.
Yeah.
Take classic doctrines of the church.
Yeah.
This is it. This is what we believe.
And that's the litmus test.
And this is what we feed. I sort of, and I don't want to poo-poo doctrine or anything. I do believe it's important, and all of that.
You said poo-poo in church.
I did say it right here in this sanctuary.
Don't edit that out. Oh no, this is
Oh
live
wait,
streamed.
it's live. So, but what I try to do, and the shift that I made several years ago, actually it was primarily when I was church planting, because So I told you last week that I decided that we were going to try to reach people who'd been wounded by the church,
Yeah.
rather than the purely unchurched or whatever you want to call. So much of that was because I was coming out of an appointment where I had been deeply wounded by
Okay.
the church.
Yeah.
And so I was in that place
Yeah, good.
going, come on, I get
Yeah,
you.
right.
Churches don't just wound laity, they can
Yeah,
wound clergy
right,
too.
right.
And so that worked there. And so what we did was, I said, I want to help people craft a Jesus-based, gospel-centered, whatever you want to call it, worldview.
Okay.
Rather than trying to just say, well, here's our doctrine of God,
Yeah.
here's our doctrine of salvation, here's our doctrine of this and that and the other. What does it look like to think theologically? To simply take in information and filter it through the lens of being a follower of Jesus before I filter it through my political lens,
Okay.
or my relational lens, or my family of origin lens, or whatever. And granted, all those things are there.
Yeah.
All those things are there. But I wanted to start crafting worldview more than doctrinal.
Can you give me
rigidity.
the two or three primary attributes of a Jesus-based worldview?
I can
For you.
tell you what it works, what it is.
Yeah,
for
that's
me.
what I mean. Yeah, I'm not saying that you're going to the definitive.
I remember after Hurricane Katrina, everybody was just screaming out, it's God's judgment on New Orleans.
Lord,
God's judgment,
Right.
Sinful city,
Yeah.
God's pouring out judgment. And I had somebody come to me and ask me, do you believe that God did this? And as I had processed through all of this, I'm sorry, it wasn't Katrina. It was
9/11?
No, it wasn't even that. It was the financial crisis of 2008. That's what it was.
Oh.
Somebody
Wow.
said, yeah. Somebody
Ooh,
said,
that's even more. That is quite a capitalist understanding of God.
Exactly.
My bank account went down.
That's exactly
I think
right.
God hates me.
it says God hate me. That's right.
Hashtag prosperity gospel.
I was thinking about what my answer was. Yeah, and a person came to me and they said, is this God's judgment on America or something like that? And I said, well, yes and no. I said, no, God did not sit up there and say, all of you have become so greedy or whatever that boom, you just lost your whole 401k.
Yeah.
No, that's not how God operates. However, in the scriptures, we see that God has set up life and relationship in these ways. And we see certain things about taking care of other people. And we see things that talk about not being greedy or hoarding. And we see, and the natural order, and built into the natural order are checks and balances to all of that.
Yeah, right.
And so we are going through one of those checks and balances right now. And so did God cause this? Did he go zap to evil America? No. Did God set up the world and relationship and resource and all that to work in certain ways? Yes. And when
So-
you go outside those bounds, there are natural consequences to those things. And so I can say in that sense, yes, I believe that a God who created this world in this natural order has put these things in motion. But here again, he didn't just go, boom, there you go.
So one of your three primary attributes of a Jesus-based worldview. I think that's your word.
Gospel-centered,
yeah,
whatever, yeah.
Yeah, important things. Is compassion and relationship.
Yes.
Is that, I don't want to put
Definitely
words
it.
in your
No,
mouth.
no, no.
Okay.
Absolutely. Compassion and relationship, and that God, well, and also I'll go to number 2, is that God has created all people in his image, has created a world that is his world, but there is no part of this world that sin has not somehow infected.
Okay.
Infected is a challenging word to use during this particular time,
right.
but nevertheless.
Okay.
And so, whether, creation, climate issues, disease, pandemic, whatever, brokenness in relationship, racism, hatred, things like this. There is no area of the world that is not somehow touched by sin and the fallenness of it. But then the third leg of this little stool is that there is also no place of that infected world that cannot also be redeemed through what God wants to do. So part of my journey from Calvinism to Arminian Wesleyanism was this idea that, and on one side, on a Calvinist side, it is that God causes all things in order to accomplish his ultimate will. And a Wesleyan Arminian side says God redeems all things in order to accomplish God's will.
Okay.
And I was always told that if I believe in free will and things of that nature, I'm diminishing the role of God. I have a smaller God than the God of the other traditions that say no, God causes everything because he's all powerful.
Predestination.
That's exactly right. All of those things. And what I eventually came up with was, well, no. Which is more powerful, the God who has to cause everything that happens in order to accomplish his will, or the God that can redeem all my stupid mistakes and still get to where he wants us to go ultimately? The God who can offer free will and still get there through redemption seems more powerful than the God who has to move all the pieces himself. And so that, in the end, that's sort of, that crafts my worldview so that as I think about all these things that are happening out there, as I'm talking to my kids, again, getting back to passing on faith, about why these things would happen, I go from those places that this is God's world, but there's no part that hasn't been touched by sin, but there's still going to be redemption here on the other side somewhere in the midst of all of this.
Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind, was kind of on my mind before you kind of went into those 3 specifics, is the role of, and this is very important to me in terms of passing on and just living out faith. And also, I would say this is also important in terms of connecting and creating a relationship, if you want to call that redemption. And for me, I like when you use the word natural order, because if there was science suggests there was a Big Bang and this kind of ever-expanding sense of entropy, to me, it's a beautiful thought to be like, our calling is to reconnect, is to is to stand in the face of that sense of of separation, is to say, how do we connect back? But all that to say, one of the elements that I'm really trying to pass on with the boys, Drew's 15. And so, as I mentioned, kind of me being baptized when I was 6, like there are certain things that he's not ready. I don't think he's ready to talk about. And I don't want to give him like this kiddie version of it yet, because I don't want him to have to then be like, wait a minute, that's way too simplistic, Dad. I mean, I want to let him kind of drive that. So to that end, one of the things that I do think is a beautiful complexity is the emphasis of orthopraxy over orthodoxy. And I think that when we lean into what does it look like to live into what we believe Jesus has called us to do, then that, to me, tears down barriers. Because it's like, you know what? I may have a certain set of convictions or thoughts, my orthodoxy.
Sure.
And it's going to look like this. You may have a completely different set of reasons or whatever, but we will live into this, orthopraxy.
Right.
Where we, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't suggest that orthodoxy is completely meaningless, but I do think, and when you were saying dogma, that's what kept coming up to mind, is it's like, I feel like we so And certainly this has to be some implication of the, the age of reason and logic and enlightenment, where it's like you're trying to scientifically prove
Sure.
systematic theology. You're trying at where we took and we foregrounded orthodoxy. And I think even as we kind of wrap this back into the trend of our conversations, and then we project forward, and as we're passing on faith to kids, that's what you're doing.
Sure.
It's like, what's the luggage that I'm going to give you that's going to last for you?
Yeah.
And I think part of that is an emphasis as mysticism and East meets West, and we see these trends kind of moving as there are more and more people who are nuns, especially this conversation that we're having now, where we have this large population of boomers, many of whom do have some religious labels on them, and their kids, this prevalent trend of them not having that label. All of this, I think, an emphasis on orthopraxy and what it looks like is going to help us to maybe reconnect across those lines that say, why are you doing that? Why are you trusting me? Why are you showing unconditional love? And it can be, we may not even have to say because of Jesus, or maybe we do, maybe it's that context, but maybe it's just like, because I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And then that's, and then maybe there's a time down the line where it's like, because I have these beliefs, but sometimes foregrounding these beliefs for you is going to be like, well, I don't, especially if you're hurt by that, or, because we all, when I say we, any of us who are connected to or in a relationship with organized religion, we all pay for the big picture. I know I've mentioned this. We all pay for the pre-scandals. We all, on certain level, we're all paying for, pastors in Louisiana and all these places who are having in Kentucky and having church when, it's putting people at risk. And those, and I get the media drum loves to get that going, but we all pay for that. So given that, I think it's going to be more and more important for us to lead with our orthopraxy.
Sure.
And then that orthodoxy is that kind of like, well, this is what drives it for me.
Right.
But we can meet in this place.
I think there's levels to it, and I'm always hesitant to put one above the other.
Yeah.
And I try, because I see that happening to the detriment of the conversation often in the larger church, that everything's only about orthodox belief, or they're so frustrated with that they go straight to the other side. Right. So I'm always hesitant to raise one above the other. But I think there's two different conversations. Institutionally, from a leadership perspective, I think an institution needs to know what it's founded on, who it is, so that it can act in a right way. Things of that nature. On a personal one-on-one level, as I'm trying to pass faith on to somebody else, a lot of times it does start with, let's take this step, let's go do this thing, and then we can process later. And it becomes it just becomes a place of working out. Paul says, "Work out your salvation with fear and trembling," and there's a working out of the doing, because nobody's going to argue with you whether or not you should go feed a hungry person. Right. But then you can sit down and have a talk about why did you feed the hungry person later. And so I think that there's a real strong reality and draw in what you're saying, that going from that. I talk about N.T. Wright a lot, and he has formed me. He is one of the theologians who's formed me. From my first year in seminary, he came to Asbury and did some lectures, and I just started reading and consuming all of his stuff at that point. But he made a comment. I got to go to hear him lecture in Houston several years back, and he made a comment in the lecture that has always stayed with me, in this idea of thinking theologically, of creating worldview over. And it's a play on an old saying. He said, if you give a man a dogma, teach him a dogma, and he will be useful as long as that dogma is in question. Teach a person to think theologically, and they will always be of benefit to the church.
The take on give a man a fish.
That's exactly right. Sure. And so if all we're going to do in trying to pass on faith is teach dogma and doctrine, which again, I find very helpful and highly important, but if that's all we're going to try to do is pass along the doctrine of sin and the doctrine of salvation, then our people will be useful as long as the doctrine of sin and the doctrine of salvation are in question. If we can teach people worldview, if we can teach how to read the scriptures and sort of take in the life of Jesus, and the instruction of Paul and how the Old Testament feeds into all of this. If you can teach people to think through those things in a spiritual way and in a practical way, then they're going to be useful in the conversations that the church is having forever.
Okay.
Forever and ever and ever. And so that's really, and that's what I want to do with my children. Do I want them to have good theology? Absolutely. We'll get there. Do I want them to just be able to look at the world, though, and think through, what does God have to say about this? Where is Jesus in the midst of this tragic thing that I'm seeing happen right now? I want them thinking those ways, because they're always going to be useful in the church, and they're always going to know that you can think about these things, rather than, well, this challenges my understanding of the doctrine of sin, therefore this can't be real.
Right.
I want them thinking through those things and coming to me going, hey, Dad, how would you think about this, so that we can have those conversations?
Yeah. So, the other, I did want to clarify with regards to orthodoxy and orthopraxy. I mean, this will get back to the Eastern, non-dual thinking. It's not a this or that. It
Right.
has, and
Right.
they're both existing at the same time. But I did have a thought about, especially in these times where there are people who their beliefs, their orthodoxy is probably on the page something that I would share a lot with. Their orthopraxy, their way of seeing the world, be it because of politics or whatever. And I would say, let me just put a finer point on it. There are people who espouse beliefs that I absolutely agree with and would champion. What it looks like for them, to me, seems so void of compassion. And so that's also this thing of like, I mentioned, I think it was last week, about, religion as an identity. And so because what we can find is this orthodoxy really is just something that sits over there, and it's a team. And,
Sure.
and so that too kind of gets me back to this orthopraxy, like, wait a minute, what does any of that matter if you're viewing this through a lens, like I'm hearing these massive gaps in just compassion. Just logic and reason as I'm hearing you is just so like, there's no way that can be the right way.
I think that that's one of the things I think that we are struggling with in our humanity, is saying, well, this is my understanding of things. And what that means is somehow, well, I mentioned it in a sermon, that whatever percentage of people today in today's world, millennials or whoever, to disagree with their idea is to say they are less than.
Yeah, right. You are your ideas.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, right.
You are your ideas.
Your
So
team.
if you come up with an idea and I say, well, no, I don't do it, and I've been known to before in debate say, well, no, I reject that idea because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to realize what they heard was, I reject you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
No, I don't reject you. I love you. Like,
Right.
come on, we're gonna go grab a drink after this or whatever.
Right.
But that.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, exactly. And so there is a disconnect there, and it's going to take a while. We're going to have to work through some stuff to get past that.
Yeah, I think that these. My hope is that these conversations continue. I mean, these conversations are happening.
Yeah.
And the more that we can model as a church, we're kind of working this thing out. The more permission. I mean, I've been surprised by how many people are watching these things, and I'm hoping that this is going to help to spark a sense of conversation among our people. But also, as you were kind of talking there, I got this image of like, it's almost as if you're walking into a barroom brawl where everybody's got their fists, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, what does it look like to walk into a barroom brawl? It's like, I'll defend myself if I have to, but I'm going to have open hands, and my goal here is to try to somehow, bring down the temperature, and for us to kind of, I really feel like that is a lot of the dynamic in which we find ourselves walking into rooms these days. And that's those people who do that usually end up taking a couple shots.
Sure.
And And it's confusing, I'm sure, for those who are in that whole fight or flight headspace, because they're going to size you up as like friend or foe, you know? And if you say no, they're like, no, it's this or that, you know?
That's right.
It's just, yeah. And then you're going to end, and then so often they're going to be like, well, it's safer for me to just label you as a foe.
Right.
Yeah, and it's so that's the to kind of push this odd analogy, but I do think that is something that falls upon us to be like, okay, well, how do we prepare people, or how do we like care for people who are going into those rooms like that, who are like, I'm not going to throw fists, because that'll take something out of you. I mean, when you're in those rooms trying to bring the temperature down and not have a dog in the fight, man. You take shots when you're not trying to do, that can really, so I think that's on my heart too, is to how do we prepare people for that, and how do we comfort them and say, yeah, I know, man, you took a shot you didn't deserve, but it's better than throwing shots.
Sure.
And
sure.
that's something that I think we just kind of live out.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
Well, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you think sometime. You can shoot us emails. You can comment in the comment box if you're on Facebook or whatever, but we appreciate you being a part of this. Mark's got a class that's going to meet following this around noon. Is that right? Around noon. So if you're interested in being a part of that on Zoom, you can email him, mark.humphrey@coker.org.
Yeah.
And he'd love to send that information to you. We appreciate you being with us. It's another exciting week of ministry here at Coker. We've got a new marriage study tonight with Dr. Michael Smalley and myself leading. We've got a new pastor study tomorrow evening with Pastor Damon. And then we're back with worshiping in our new sermon series called Wake Up, starting this Sunday.
Yeah, we have church on Sundays.
We do church on Sundays. I don't know what day it is,
today?
by the way. Yeah, exactly. I have no idea. New sermon series starting this Sunday, Wake Up. We're talking about waking up from a dead faith. This week, wake up from a dead marriage the following week, and then wake up from deadly hate the week after that. And so, hope you'll join us for some of these sermons and these times of worship. Thanks for being with us today, friends. Hope you have a great day.
See you.